All right. So we're going to welcome everyone to our 4 o'clock Securing America's Energy Supply panel, panel 8 of 8. So we're in the home stretch now. We can see the finish line. But seriously, today has been a really amazing day. I thought I would do this maybe at the beginning of the briefing rather than the end of the briefing because it's a captive audience. And so before we end the policy forum portion of the day, I just wanted to make sure to give some special thank yous. Starting with my EESI colleagues who make all of this happen. Becky Blood is our Expo coordinator. She's holding court over in the foyer, but big thanks to Becky for helping us out. Thanks also to Omri and Dan O and Anna and Nicole and Laura and Allison and Hannah and Ulrich and Susan and David and Tim. Not all of them routinely are involved in EESI briefings and congressional events, but it's really great when we have a day like today where everyone shows up and makes a contribution. So thanks to everybody who had a role to play in bringing today to fruition. We also have 3 amazing interns. All of them have been seated in that chair, helping with timekeeping and microphones. Right now it's Jasmine, but we also have Aaron and Isabel, who are also great interns. And we have Jonathan and Jeff, 2 of our fellows with us today as well. And they make great contributions as well. This panel is a special, all of our panels are special. I've said that like 8 times today. But this one's special for its own reason, and that is because it represents where there's a lot of overlap in the interests and priorities for 2 of our co-chairs on the Senate Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Caucus. Senator Crapo is a huge fan of what's happening at INL, Idaho National Lab. Senator Reed's chairman or ranking member now of the Armed Services Committee. And so between the 2 of them, they always encourage us to do a panel looking at energy independence, securing America's energy supply, national security. It always takes a little bit of a different shape, but I'm really happy with how this panel worked out. So to kick us off, speaking of Senator Crapo, he pre-recorded some video remarks for us. So my friend Dan O is going to pull him up. And then after we hear from Senator Crapo, we'll get to the panel and we'll dig right in. So thanks.
Oh, weird. Okay. Oh. At the end. Oh, there we go. Tried to get it up early for us, and then guess what happens? No?
Hello.
Oh, okay. Display felt like not showing that. Okay, give me 1 second. Sorry. No. Duplicate displays. Okay, everybody. Ready?
I'm Mike Crapo, the senior senator
Hello.
from Idaho.
I'm Mike
the
Crapo.
co-chair of the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Caucus. Thank you all for attending the 2025 Congressional Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Expo. I extend my gratitude to EESI for putting this expo together every year. Additionally, I thank my co-chair, Senator Reed, as well as our deputy co-chairs, Senator Collins and Senator Van Hollen, for their collaboration on this caucus's important issues. The REEE caucus and EESI provide valuable opportunities to share ideas across the aisle and find bipartisan support for common sense renewable energy solutions and energy efficient technologies that strengthen our energy security. I'm particularly proud to represent Idaho, where roughly 70% of our total generated electricity comes from renewable energy sources. Hydropower alone provides 45% approximately of Idaho's total in-state electricity generation. Idaho is also home to some of the most forward-looking energy research in the country, thanks to the public-private partnership at the Idaho National Laboratory. INL is making continuous breakthroughs in clean energy technologies in fields such as advanced nuclear energy and biomass fuels, to integrated energy systems and next-generation power generation. Here in the Senate, we have made important legislative strides to support this work. In the last Congress, I joined several of my Senate colleagues in introducing the ADVANCE Act, which was signed into law in July 2024. following overwhelmingly bipartisan support in the Senate. Now in effect, the law modernizes the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's licensing process and promotes investment in advanced technologies, including projects like INL's Dome microreactor, which embodies the kind of innovation the ADVANCE Act was designed to support. Looking ahead, Idaho is also well positioned and leading the way on geothermal energy, with direct use systems already operating and growing momentum around advanced geothermal technologies. This is a promising area for future bipartisan work, given its year-round reliability and potential to support rural economic development. I look forward to continued work in the REEE Caucus to further good bipartisan legislation that benefits all Americans, both rural and urban. The answers to our energy security needs can be found here, with input from valuable members of the energy industry from across the political spectrum. Again, thank you for coming to today's Expo and lending your time and experience to these discussions. I look forward to working with all of you in the future.
Thank you, Senator Crapo, for that. It's a busy day, and I know we're lots of stuff going on, but Senator Reed and Senator Crapo are great offices to work with, Senator Collins and Van Hollen as well. And lest I forget to mention Representative Cleaver's office on the House side, they're the House co-chair. It is really a fun process to put this together with their help. So without any further ado, we have three tremendous panelists to help us understand some of the issues affecting America's energy supply and how we can make that more secure. First up is John Hensley. John is a Senior Vice President for Markets and Policy Analysis at the American Clean Power Association. John, welcome to your first Expo. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to you guys at EESI for the invitation and putting on this Expo. It's great to be having this conversation and putting these issues forward. As Dan said, I am at the American Clean Power Association. We are the national trade association representing utility-scale wind, solar, and battery storage technologies, as well as the transmission assets that are needed to move those valuable electrons around the country. We represent the entire kind of value chain that is required to bring a utility-scale project online, everything from development activities on up through the actual manufacturing of the components, to the functioning of the grid through our utilities and balancing authorities. So I've been given some version of this speech for a little while now, but I don't know that it's fully sunk in yet just how much power we are going to require, not just over the next 15 or 20 years, but probably most critically over the next 5 years. We did this work with a number of other trade associations in town, API, Chamber, EEI, and others, just to get a handle on, as we start to really unpack some of the main demand drivers that we see out there, everything from the resurgence of manufacturing that's taking shape, the artificial intelligence strides that we're making and the huge data center loads that are associated with them, on through the electrification trends that we're seeing in terms of electric vehicles coming online, heat pumps coming online, and other kind of electrification of industrial processes. We're looking at a 10-year period in front of us that is going to require more new generation to be created than any other 10-year period in the country's history. Full stop. To put some numbers behind it, it's about 1,000 terawatt hours of new power that's going to be required. It's like adding 2 Texases to the grid in 5 years, 5 to 10 years. It is an incredible undertaking. And, as we think about the topic for this panel, which is basically like, where are we going to get all that supply to meet that load? And I'm sure we'll get into some of the challenges and obstacles that are in that space. But, we sort of need to open the floodgates and, find ways to improve the processes, the permitting, and the timelines to actually get these projects online so that we are able to meet this demand and continue to support the growth of the country and of these innovative sectors that we're seeing in this space, particularly AI, but across the tech space, the resurgence in manufacturing that we're seeing. Those are all going to be critical to moving forward. I think the good news at the end of the day is that we have the resources the country is a very resource-rich area, whether you're talking oil and gas, renewables, storage technologies, the manufacturing capacity to do it, the supply chains to meet it, the development expertise to actually bring those projects in line. We are rich with all those assets. It does really come down to sort of the regulatory and the policy environment that is slowing us at the moment. And, we're here in the Capitol. These are places where we can work to solve those problems and actually meet the demand that's in front of us. So anyway, thanks, Dan, for having me, and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, John. That was a great way to kick things off. Next up is Will Rogers. Will is a principal with Converge Strategies. Will, welcome to your first Expo. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And thanks to the EESI team for putting together a really great program today. As Daniel said, I'm Will Rogers. I'm a principal with Converge Strategies. We're a consulting firm that specializes in energy resilience and national security. Until January, I was a senior advisor to the U.S. Army, helping the department improve the critical infrastructure of its installations against all hazards, particularly extreme weather that we know is becoming more frequent and severe. And then before I joined the Army, I spent about a decade on Capitol Hill on the Senate side as a national security staffer. For my House friends here in the audience, don't let my Senate time count against me here. What I thought I'd do is just sort of plant a flag on an issue that I don't think gets a ton of conversation in the energy security conversation, and that's the relationship between the Department of Defense's mission and the importance of a resilient and reliable transmission grid. If you've spent any time around military installations, you know that they come in all shapes and sizes, but they generally look like a small town. They've got cinemas and bowling alleys, they've got subdivisions for housing. Some of them have regional airports, or the equivalent of a regional airport. They've got a base commander who's like the equivalent of a mayor, but they generally have the same kind of energy profile of a small town. They may have, depending on the missions at these installations, their load may vary. Fighter squadrons, for example, generate more energy requirements than, say, a ground force training mission. But they tend to be the large load customers in a region wherever these installations are located. But the one thing is, people may not associate military installations and the large load that comes with military installations as DoD's primary energy needs. When most people think of DoD's energy needs, they might think about the fuel the military might need for the mission over there, wherever over there might be. And that's in part because of the 20 years of experience we've had in Iraq and Afghanistan, where fuel and moving fuel to the force was one of the biggest liabilities for the U.S. military, because we had enemy combatants that were targeting fuel convoys. So we learned a lot of lessons from that. But one of the things we're experiencing today is that modern warfare has evolved, and U.S. military installations here at home are actually playing a very critical part of overseas operations today. And that's because we've got facilities on installations that are tied to the commercial power grid that are supporting warfighters in the field. You've got command and control facilities that are supporting special operators in the field. You've got people piloting drones, providing critical overwatch for people that are deployed overseas. And you've got offensive and defensive cyber squadrons disrupting bad actors, helping to make sure our forces stay safe wherever they're operating abroad. And all of these activities that I just described largely rely on resilient, reliable power from the commercial power grid. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, surely the military has to have on-base backup power. And you'd be right. The Department of Defense has made some very intentional work over the last decade or so to invest in on-site renewable generation, battery storage, and microgrids. You probably hear a lot about microgrids, to be able to make sure it has enough power to support those critical missions that I was just describing. In some places, if they're lucky, they have probably up to 2 weeks of backup power. And that sounds like a lot, and it is. But it's increasingly not enough power to be able to ride out whatever might be happening on the commercial power grid, because that 2 weeks of backup power, that's based on the assumption that whatever might be happening outside the fence line is enough to be able to make sure the military can continue to do whatever it needs to do. But we've seen one too many instances where the power grid outside of the installation might be down longer for that 2 week period, whether it's Winter Storm Uri or Elliott or Hurricane Helene. There's really a non-zero risk that the commercial power grid will be down longer, and those critical missions that I was just describing could be put in peril, and that's a national defense emergency. So even if the department does have enough power to be able to ride out whatever might be happening outside the fence line, those critical missions that I just described, they rely on people who live out in the community. In fact, I think most people who don't do a lot of work around the military don't realize that 2/3 of the troops who work on base, they live out in the community. All of DoD civilians, they live out in the community. They support their families out in the community. We need those people to be the best versions of themselves when they come to those installations to do critical mission work. And it's really hard to be the best version of yourself if you are worried, or if you're worried about your family's ability to get access to critical facilities like hospitals, grocery stores, or schools that might be without power during a commercial power outage. And so even if the grid is, even if the military installation has enough backup power, the grid's down, and it can be a national defense emergency. So knowing all that, what can we do about that? Well, that's really what Converge Strategies has been trying to do. Over the last several years, we've been building a body of work around the national defense importance of a resilient and reliable transmission grid. And I'm here just to plant a flag on that. I'd love to take the conversation in whatever direction you're interested in. We've been doing some work. We've got copies of these reports. Our most recent report is Unleashing the Grid, Energy Dominance from National Defense, which looks at how the Department of Defense can do some intentional work working with utilities and grid planners to shore up the electricity grid. And we can have a conversation about that or any other issues that are related to the Department of Defense. But I appreciate the chance to be here.
Thanks, Will. Lots to talk about at the reception. Next up is Jake Gentle. Jake is a longtime EXPO panelist. And again, thanks to Senator Crapo's office for getting us to know each other. Jake is a senior manager of distributed energy systems at Idaho National Lab. Jake, once again, thanks for being here, and turn it over to you.
Thanks again, and it's quite interesting for me to hear my name against a quite long time, EESI supporter and panelist. I remember being invited here, going, me, seriously? But it's been great. It's been one of the more interesting panels and discussions I think I've had over time. And what's really great is I get to sit next to two people that I've not met in person, yet I've worked with ACP for many, many years. And with Converge Strategies, we do a lot of work together, including our Resilience Week effort that's coming up here in a couple months. So I want to start off with something that may not surprise too many of my colleagues in the room, which is have the end in mind. And I say that to start off because I know what our end is for the day. It's the reception. I'm not sure that everybody understands what the end is when they're starting into research or when they're going into academics and saying, okay, what college do I want to go to? I say have the end in mind first because the research we do at Idaho National Laboratory, which has been introduced a couple times today, so I'm not going to go through that whole spiel. But at the end of the day, as one of 17 national laboratories, we have a couple key mission areas. For me, it's getting that information, that innovation, that knowledge out into industry. So industry partnerships is always critical for me. So having the end in mind is who can I partner with? EESI is one of those key partners. I'll say that to start. Converge, again, another key partner to help us get our messaging, our innovation out into the world. And most important is getting that into practice. And so organizations like ACP, SEIA, Solar Energy Industry Association, Energy Systems Integration Group, there's a bunch of associations that we work with on a regular basis. And for me, it's always maintaining those partnerships to make sure our great work gets out into the hands of the people who need to receive it. So first off, as the nation's lead nuclear laboratory, you heard from Senator Crapo, which actually is kind of funny. From a resilience and security perspective, I remember playing soccer in his front yard. Probably the deepest cut I think I've ever had is in my knee. The longest scar I think I have is in my knee, and it's because I fell on a piece of glass in his yard. So it goes way back. Idaho is a great state. It's a small state in terms of the number of people, but we're resilient and reliable. I'm saying our electric grid needs to have that same attitude. It's big, it's vast. Transmission, distribution, we all need access to it. It has to be reliable and resilient. So when we think about the things that as a national lab that we have to focus on, cybersecurity is one of those. Transmission access is another. Capacity, meaning generation, is a third. So for all of the things that kind of boil together, I like to focus on that integrated energy solution. And Shannon mentioned this earlier in the day as well. How do we utilize everything we have, all the tools we have, to make sure we're successful? Grid resilience is not shy to certain things. The lack of capacity and generation absolutely is something we all know. Increase in large loads, data centers, right? What about cyber attacks? Physical attacks. We've seen substations around our country being attacked by physical means. And then natural hazards. These are all threats to our critical infrastructure that we have to deal with. As a national lab, we think we have the tools for modeling, prototyping of solutions to full-scale demonstrations, and then also training, getting that information out into the hands of the people that really need to use it, to implement it on a daily basis. On the panel earlier today, we had a big shout out to one of our tools by the Hydropower Association, National Hydropower Association, for non-powered dams. It's like visualizing where in the country do we have non-powered dams. What's the purpose of that? Well, how do we get more electricity out of the existing infrastructure? Maybe we got to power some of those dams. So kind of tying a lot of this together, I wanted to say that having the end in mind is important. Data centers were mentioned. Idaho National Laboratory was just announced as one of 4 potential sites for development of data centers on federal property. If there's more questions around that, that's about all I got. But Sarah and others in the room, they can definitely help me with that. And then adding geothermal. You know, with INL having deep wells and a great geothermal resource, how do you put those two together? So that's integrating technical solutions that exist to try and solve national needs. The last thing I'll say, supply chain, supply chain, supply chain. It doesn't matter what it is. We have a dependence on the supply chain. And if you're not thinking security of our supply chain, you're also missing an opportunity to really strengthen the resilience and reliability of our grid. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dan.
That's great, Jake. And so many of what you just talked, a lot of what you've talked about has come up in so many different ways. There's all these different facets to these issues, and they've come up on the energy efficiency panels, the renewable energy panels, and now obviously on this one. So my friend Jasmine is up here with a microphone, and she'll be more than happy to find her way to you if you have a question. But Jake, you just said supply chain, supply chain, supply chain, which I guess how a realtor might say it. But I want to come back to that, and I'd love to give John and Will a chance to comment, and then you, of course, can weigh in as well. But you know, a lot of the energy we consume is mostly generated in the U.S., but in order to do that, we have a lot of dependencies on a lot of countries and a lot of parts of the world. Some of those are friendlier than others. How should we be thinking about supply chain needs to ensure that U.S. energy consumers are kind of insulated from, you know, supply chain shocks that, you know, might cause disruptions to their quality of life or prevent opportunities for economic development or things like that? And John, I turn it over to you, and then we'll hear from Will and Jake again.
Well, some of the challenges that we're late to the game, right? We should have been planning this 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We're late. And in some cases, we are losing to other global players that have invested in these technologies and brought them to market quicker than we have. And but that doesn't mean there's not a great time to start and try to get behind the ball and actually play some of that catch up and improve the resiliency and security of those supply chains. As we think about that incredible amount of power that's going to be required in this country over the next 15 to 20 years, there are lots of barriers that are preventing those projects that I talked about before. But one of them that does come up over and over again is ability to actually get the parts and components that are going to be needed to supply those facilities. So whether it's a transformer to actually get the transmission infrastructure in place, or get the interconnect for the facility in place, down to the individual components that are needed at the facility. Lots of people want to build gas plants at the moment. Good luck getting a gas turbine. Can't get one until 2030, and even at that point, supply is pretty well constrained, and there's sort of a question of how much do the manufacturers want to invest in that space and be left holding a ton of capacity when we eventually do solve some of these supply challenges. So we got to start now. The good news is a lot of this momentum has been building over the past couple of years. Speaking just from the clean energy perspective, we built 45 new manufacturing facilities in the country last year to build everything from solar modules to wind turbine manufacturing facilities to battery storage facilities, and all the little parts, components, and widgets that go into them. And we've got plans for lots more. I think at the moment we're tracking around 188 facilities that are either actively under construction, being built today, or that are pretty far along in the development queue and either just need a little bit more of a market signal or a little bit more policy stability to move forward. And that allows us to accomplish a number of things. One, we bring that investment and that economic development to the U.S., and these are incredibly rich facilities that are driving job growth, economic growth, GDP enhancements. We did a study earlier this year that found most of these manufacturing facilities provide careers on the order of $100,000 a year in terms of salary. So they're well-paying jobs. and they're improving a lot of the local infrastructure that's around them and driving economic development in the places that they're located. It's improving the security and resiliency of those supply chains. We're especially in a somewhat tumultuous trade environment. You don't want to be turning around every day to wonder, all right, where's it safe for me to source today? The more you sort of shore that in America or in more kind of aligned friendly nation states, the less exposure and risk you have on that front. And potentially ultimately it helps from a quality and availability standpoint. It can be challenging when we face into either transportation and logistics constraints, or just as everybody is trying to rush to market and get these facilities, quality concerns become a real issue, and the grid is not a place that we need to be skimping on the quality of these components. So incredibly important issue. We are definitely behind, but we are making a lot of investments to try to catch up. And with continued focus in this space, I think the U.S. can solve a lot of these problems and become a big manufacturing hub for much of this equipment.
Thanks, John. And Will, in your work, where does supply chain come in, and how important is it, and what makes it so important?
Yeah, well, so John, I think, hit on some of the major points. I don't want to repeat anything he's already said here. I think supply chain due diligence is always a challenge whenever you're working with the U.S. military and making sure that we're not sourcing any components from countries of concern. And we do a lot of work to kind of keep that mindset in the frame of how we develop resilient solutions and working with our partners there. Just adding to a couple of points to what John said, I think there are other opportunities if we're looking at onshoring and ally shoring our own supply chains to mitigate some of the risks that we've sort of gotten ourselves into over the last several decades. There are also opportunities here to look for substitutes for the critical materials that we've relied on for advanced energy components. And I know there's been a lot of work, including with the national labs, to explore alternatives to lithium storage, for example, looking at redox flow, vanadium flow, and other kinds of components. We're moving away from single points of failure in the supply chain ecosystem for energy storage technologies. And I think we need to lean more into that space. And then also recycling of critical components as well. I think in the sort of vernacular of energy abundance, where we think we can have just everything and it comes at zero cost, I think we need to also be mindful of the sort of small c conservation mindset, that it's conservation is not weakness. Abundance, we see that as strength, but we also need to keep in mind that there is opportunity and efficiency in conservation and reaping out as much through the recycling process of spent critical materials to make sure that we are husbanding those resources as best as possible. And leaning into that, I think, is a practice that serves us all well.
Representative Ruiz was with us earlier today, and his district is home to some lithium resources. It was very interesting to hear him talk a little bit about how they're thinking about doing that, using those resources in a sustainable way. Jake, based on what you just heard from John and Will, I'll give you a chance to riff a little bit.
A couple points I'll take. The first one, supply chain, I mentioned it in my opening remarks, is digital security regarding our supply chain. So if we bring it in, we've got to make sure it's secure before we plug it in. So that's the first part. That's the easy part, but it's really hard to do. There's a lot of innovation that's out there that's available, but I think entities need to figure out the best, most efficient way of making sure that their digital technologies are secure. I'm going to pivot, though. I think we need to use what we have more efficiently and more effectively. And so when we think about technologies like grid-enhancing technologies, this is dynamic line ratings for transmission lines, using the existing capacity we have in our existing overhead transmission lines and underground cables, using them to our fullest potential. We have innovation out there to do that. There's market drivers that don't allow us to invest in it. It's easier to invest in something new, or to get investors to invest in something new, than it is to use the existing thing better. Right? So that's the first thing, is incentivize better utilization of our existing infrastructure. It's critical. Second part, advanced conductors. This is a topic area that I think from a reliability, grid reliability, and security of, we have to utilize innovation. We have innovation, we need to trust it. It goes back to some points of why do the national labs exist? Well, one of those is Idaho National Laboratory has one of the largest full-scale power grid test beds in the country. The ability for us to verify and validate some of these technologies at scale in full operations with all the natural hazards, physical hazards, and cyber threats against them allows those industry partners to truly come out and verify, validate their new supply chain. their new innovation so that their utilities or whoever else is going to adopt and implement it at scale can trust it, right? Because the hardest part is if you're an electric utility saying, I want to be first to be third, which is, I don't want to be the first person to try that or the second person to try that. I want to be the third because maybe the bugs are worked out. So I think we need to be a little bit more proactive about using what we have, but also going through the rigorous, verification validation process that I know we can do.
Great, thanks. Looking for hands. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise. Oh, there we go.
Probably for Will or John, maybe. There was at one time push Obama to have renewables in every federal facility, special basis. Gave them 10 years. They were done in about 2 years. Mandated all federal facilities. They started that in this round of funding with microgrids. Sort of, is that still on the agenda? Is it on the agenda because it's a national security item? Or that thing survived?
So the question, in case the mic didn't pick it up quite so well, was that a question about putting renewables on installations and the use of microgrids and kind of what the status of that deployment is. And I think he pointed to you, Will, but of course Jake and John would be welcome to chime in too.
Yeah. So, I think microgrids and renewable generation and storage have been sort of a bipartisan issue. The first Trump administration supported those programs. I think you were referencing the origination during the Obama administration, carried through the first Trump administration, and then the Biden administration. I think there's still been some support for certainly microgrids and also on-site generation storage. The question around whether or not there will continue to be a pressing for renewables, I think, is an open question. My estimation is, and even during the Biden administration, we didn't push renewables solely because they were renewables. It happened to be because they were the most resilient form of on-site generation. I mean, if you have solar storage and a microgrid solution, that reduced your vulnerability to having to pipe in natural gas for your natural gas generators or bringing in diesel fuel for your diesel gen sets. And that's an inherent vulnerability for the military installation, full stop. And they recognize that because in an extreme weather situation, we saw this in Texas during Winter Storm Uri, your natural gas generators don't work because electricity is down and you can't compress natural gas and get the pressure working. And then diesel fuel contracts are only as good as your ability of your supplier to be able to fulfill them. And we've seen one too many instances where diesel fuel contracts are not supplied to be able to allow diesel generators to run for the amount of time that they need. So I'd look at it through the lens of, generation agnostic. Renewables just happens to be the most resilient form. And hopefully this administration keeps that in the mindset well within the frame of reference. But I think microgrids certainly is something that they're continuing to press forward on.
Thanks. John or Jake, any comments in response to that?
What he said.
Okay. Ditto.
Yeah, I'd say that the inclusion of new technology to help microgrids be successful. DoD launched the Spiders program years ago, where it was like doomsday deployment of renewables with storage on site, and you had to have so many days, and you had to have this massive transfer switch to okay, the grid went down, and now we got to energize our grid using on-site generation. I think innovation has moved us into a way where these are now energy efficiency projects that have the ability to island away and segment parts of the defense or any other critical infrastructure so that you're getting the most reliability out of the system when you need it. But when you don't need it as a standalone system, it's producing something back for you. And I think that's the energy efficiency part of microgrids that's allowed. Another part of this is innovation, like wind and solar. The larger you go, the lower the cost, right? Or the more you can deploy, the lower the cost. I think definitely not a nuclear expert here. So if you have questions, Shannon and others can definitely answer them for you. But what I will say is microreactors, these megawatt class nuclear reactors, small modular reactors that can stack. That's a game changer for the concept of microgrids. The ability for a defense installation to rely on cost and time. So if you can maintain those two things, yes, the innovation is great. So I think what we have to do is drive down costs. It's the same thing every other technology has had to do. Sometimes they do it too well and compromise reliability, so we got to go back up a little bit. So in this case, I would say, think think about microgrids as an option. Islanded grids are also an option. They just aren't for everywhere.
Okay, thanks. Other questions in the audience? Great, thank you.
I have a question about grids. Senator Crapo noted that 70% of Idaho's electricity is now generated by renewables. That's great, but as he also noted, it's by most of that's hydro, base load. How far are we from the ability on grid management to handle 70% renewables if it was just variable wind and solar?
Ooh, that's a good one. Go ahead, John.
Jake's the engineer, so I'll let him address the engineering challenges of this. But the analogy that I like to use, and I think we've gotten way too far out over our skis in terms of thinking about a majority renewables grid or a high penetration renewables grid. The way I like to compare this is, let's pretend our journey in kind of the renewable landscape is like building a road from LA to New York. Everybody is so worried about that last mile into New York, which undoubtedly is going to be the most complicated, the most expensive, the most challenging, et cetera. We're only in Utah. We've got a long time and a lot of resources to throw at figuring out that problem at the end of the road. And we may not even ever get there. Like that, a system that is majority renewables or 80+% renewables may not even make much sense. But today, we're about 15% wind and solar across the country. Once you add in hydro and other technologies, closer to 25%. In some markets, it's much higher than that. SPP, for instance, regularly operates at greater than 50% renewables and does not seem to have many reliability issues or challenges. At the end of the day, grid operators are really good at what they do. And they build tools, they build solutions that help them to bring the diversity of resources that they have on their system to bear and ensure that demand is meeting supply in all hours. Now, there's lots of nuances to all this, and happy to have a conversation around different challenges and what main points of grid failure are and the challenges that each and every technology has. At the end of the day, you want your grid to kind of look like your stock portfolio. A very diversified grid that has ability to mitigate different types of risk is the best type of grid. And that is what we are increasingly building. We've been a very fossil fuel heavy grid for the last 50 years. And every time that we add more nuclear, more renewables, more storage, we're building out an increasingly diverse portfolio of resources that are helping to keep the grid reliable and low cost.
Thanks. Jake, Will, anything you'd like to comment on that? Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned the state of Idaho. You mentioned hydropower. We have a lot of variability in our hydropower facilities. We have reservoirs, right? They're not ideal storage mediums, but they are longer term storage mediums. We also have run-of-river hydro. So hydropower is more than just baseload, right? It's dispatchable. And it also is seasonally variable as we are drier and drier with less fuel, if you will. What I'll say is getting from where we are today to 100% inverter-based resources onto our electric grid, that's a long ways. That's you're not even out of LA County on that one, right? We have states that have 125, 150% wind generation as an export. We know we can do it in a region of the grid that we have planned for it. What we don't have is everybody playing from the same playbook, right? Our interconnections aren't even connected. Think about the cold snap where ERCOT was like, uh-oh, our gas and everything else is kind of struggling here. Well, so was a lot of our renewable assets because they didn't have that cold weather package. Not everybody was playing from the same playbook. They didn't expect to have wind turbines with cold weather packages in the middle of Texas. So I think the challenge is understanding what game are we even playing? If you want to stick with a sports analogy, are we on the same team? And what play are we going to run? I think once we solve those three things, the technology's there, the solutions are there. Now it's when you have to compete and build controls to mitigate what you don't know from the other participant, what the other player's doing, that's where it gets really complicated. But from an engineering perspective, I think we have the innovation, we have the expertise, And we have the human capital in the United States to be able to achieve it. Now we just got to find the right game or playbook or whatever to play with.
Yeah. Pick the right metaphor and
Yeah.
it'll work out. We have another, Jasmine, a little bit further down on the wall, and I think you might have our last question of the day.
Why aren't we using vanadium low electrolyte batteries? Used for peaker, Gigar Charlotte.
Actually, I'm having a really hard time hearing. I can't really quite make out what you're
Why
saying.
don't we try? Why don't we use vanadium flow batteries like China and Australia? They can use for peakers. It's an electrolyte battery for Gigar Charlotte.
Repeat the question. It's
Yeah,
about
please,
the,
Jasmine, that'd be great. Thank you.
Vanadium batteries used in China and Australia, and why we're not using them in the U.S.
I don't know if anyone has a comment on that.
I'll just talk about from my own experience. I think cost has a lot to do with why we're not using vanadium flow batteries specifically, but I think that'll change as we do more work to demonstrate both the sourcing of the electrolyte material and to be able to demonstrate the value at scale of these kinds of technologies to be able to benefit reliability and affordability for ratepayers. Just from my experience working with the Army, for example, we did work with Lockheed Martin out at Fort Carson, a 1 megawatt, 10 megawatt hour redox flow battery pilot to demonstrate the value to resilience for the U.S. military's mission. That showed some value there. It's not vanadium flow specifically, but the costs there were not yet right for the military to sort of scale it up across the entire U.S. Army enterprise. But I think, give it a few years, and I think you might be able to take a sort of portfolio approach to these kinds of technologies to be able to support reliability and affordability for not just large load customers like the Department of Defense, but for others who are interested in firm storage to be able to support their energy needs.
Thanks. So sometimes these Securing America's Energy Supply National Security panels, you get to the end of it and you're like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. So maybe the thing to do then is to wrap it up. And Jake, maybe we could start with you and end with John. We'll treat this as a little bit of a lightning round. Short answer, brief idea, but what's your vision? What would you like to see happen in the next 3 to 5 years that would allow us to say that we've, substantially and meaningfully improved our energy supply, and that means we've been able to realize all the benefits from having that?
I think an invitation in my inbox in about 10 months to be at the next event is a great goal. But between now and then, I think for us to really start to identify what matters most. I think we've got technologies entering our ecosystem that have not been vetted, verified, and validated in terms of their security and resilience. We have a source of digital technologies that we know have vulnerabilities and backdoors. I think we have to think about that first, right? Energy dominance, sure, great, but what happens if we're putting stuff into our system that we can't trust? You got to ask the question first. So I think be inquisitive, ask the right questions, and ask this question of our own organizations: are we doing the right thing to ensure security and resilience?
Great. Thank you. Will?
Yeah, Jake talked about making sure we're getting the most out of the existing system that we do have. When we look at the transmission grid, for example, looking at grid enhancing technologies and advanced transmission technologies, and I think that is critically important. But I think not for nothing, we are sort of underappreciating the importance of interregional and regional transmission and investing in a portfolio of transmission lines that's going to help us unleash, I guess is sort of the term I want to keep using, going back to, resources across the country and getting them to communities that are under-resourced and need that energy for reliability and affordability purposes. I mean, we've got 1,250 gigawatts of installed electricity generation in this country, but only 35 gigawatts of transfer capacity. I mean, that's just not tenable for the situation that we're looking at. Everything John pointed out in terms of where grid growth is heading over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so we really need a concerted approach to that. And I think large load customers, not just your metascalers, but like the Department of Defense, can play an intentional role working with utilities and grid planners to make a concerted investment in how we build the grid of the future that serves not just the Department of Defense's needs, but communities everywhere.
Great, thanks. And John, this will give you the last word on the panel today.
Okay.
The last word of the expo, the policy forum. Oh my
don't
God.
put too much pressure.
The pressure,
on me.
the pressure.
Honestly, I hope to see us continue to be on the current trajectory that we're on. We as a country built 50 gigawatts of new power resources last year. We need to maintain that momentum and continue to add to it. We're looking at this massive need in front of us. That means that we need to, 55 this year, 60 next year, 75 the year after that. And it has to come from an all the above strategy. And I know that term's starting to get a little bit tainted and abused, but we need to be thinking about what are the coal retirements that don't make sense anymore and that we need to preserve. We need to build as much gas as we can possibly get on the grid and that we can order turbines for. And we also need to leverage the great wind, solar, and battery resources that we have so that we continue to meet those generation needs, support all of the great innovation and underlying economic growth that we're seeing in this country. Otherwise, we're going to start falling behind, and we're going to start losing on the AI race. We're going to start losing on economic growth. We're going to start losing on just general economic prosperity across the country.
Great, thanks. Yeah, the best time to do a lot of this stuff was yesterday, unfortunately, but we'll do it today. John and Will and Jake, thank you for being on our panel today. You did a great job. Well, that wraps up the 8th panel of our policy forum. Thanks again for all of you sticking with us. We had tremendous attendance in all of our panels today. We really appreciate that. Also, I haven't acknowledged the people in our live cast quite as much today, but a lot of people are watching this online. And a lot of people will watch the recordings and things like that and read the summary notes. And a lot of people will consume this information. So I'm really happy about that. We will wrap up there. I hope everyone, if you liked what you heard, I hope you'll visit us at eesi.org. We have a lot of great briefings coming up when we get back from Labor Day. If you want to learn about Ohio River resilience, for example, if you want to learn more about data centers and artificial intelligence, and even more. We also have a briefing series kicking off right before the UNFCCC negotiations that will happen in November. So if you want to learn about the UNFCCC and what that looks like without the United States being as present or present at all, we have some really great briefings lined up for that as well. We'll see everybody hopefully in the reception. That's just around the corner in the Rayburn foyer. Be sure to check out all the cool exhibits that are stacked up. There's a lot of great stuff, and I think we'll have some great conversations. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you down the hall in 10 minutes or so. Thank you.